about the DI of Magento. So the first part, we're going to create our own object manager. So we're going to create it inside PHP without Magento related. It's just to understand how the guys that created Magento was thinking about creating the framework. So it's something that we're going to create our own object manager in PHP, and we are going to compare with the Magento one and see how Magento one works. Actually, we're going to really deep on this. We're going to check the object manager inside Magento and see the code and understand how it works. Also, explain a little bit about when we create the classes, about inheritance versus composition, and why we should work with composition. I also explain a little bit about service contract, interface, and those things. I explained how Magento creates PHP files because it creates PHP files inside generation folders. I'm going to explain about factories, proxy, plugins, types, and virtual types, but not just how to use them. We are going really deep inside it, and we're going to see how Magento understands them, and how it works inside Magento, not just the use of it, but how Magento really works with that. We're going to understand everything about the generation folder and what are the files created there, and what's inside the code folder, what's inside the metadata folder, and we're going to understand 100% of that. Also, we're going to understand the setup DI compile. It's the CLI command. You know, it has 9 operations or 9 steps, and we're going to understand each one of those steps, what they do, and how that works. So let's go to the video. Okay, let's talk about dependency injection inside Magento. Imagine that we have this world of cars, okay? So imagine this car in special. The model of the car, it's a BMW car. And let's imagine that you bought one and I bought one in the same day. They're not the same car, right? Let's say, for example, my car is black and yours is blue. Could be any other car in the world, right? So car concept is something abstract. And I want to show you something about this. So I created already a class here called M340. That's a specific module of that car. And I have this car. So my car is a new M340, right? And you have this car too. So your car, it's also M340. Here I'm not using anything of Magento, so I'm creating this just in PHP. So you can see that to me use this class, I need to import it to my project, right? So it was inside here module M340, right? So I had to use this required to import it to my project. Or PHP will never know that exists because PHP doesn't go folder by folder, checking the PHP files and loading them. It works this way, right? I have to require this file here. So I have my car, you have your car. So let's take a look of the class car. The class car is extending the abstract class car. So let's look this car, this abstract class. This abstract class car has the brand. So many different cars will have many different brands, right? But in our case, we both has this car. So we both has BMW as the brand. So if I check here back to M340, you're going to see that it's extended the car. So many other modules from many other brands would extend car too. It's something abstract. The car itself could be extended, for example, vehicle. So it could be a car, could be a bicycle, a motorcycle, whatever that could be extended vehicle. So you got something more abstract and you are going to something more specific. So M340 itself, it's our module. And inside the constructor of it, it's asking the color. So let's go back here and say that my car is black and your car is blue, right? So continue here. When I created this M340 and I send it as constructor the color of car, it's saving this color that's received by constructor in this attribute color. And I have here a get color when I want to get this information back. So if I use anytime my car get color, it will return black, of course. And your car get color, it will return blue. So we have two different objects inside the memory, and each one it's this object. So we're not reusing the object again or something like that. Okay. Parent of this class M340 is the car, right? So when I create this class, I'm also creating I'm sending a constructor to the parent one. Because if I didn't do it this way, and my parent one, that's the car, it has a construct. When I extend it and I use construct again, I'm replacing the construct method of the car, never going to be called. So I'm going to use something like this, parent, and I will then send information to the constructor of car. And this constructor is asking the brand of the car. So here inside M340, I'm constructing the parent, the car, and I send that the brand is BMW. Okay. So here inside the car, I just have one information, color, and get color is the only information. The rest of information of this specific car, like we said, the only difference between yours and mine is the color. The rest information, for example, that's BMW or something, that comes from the concept of being a car. So every car has a brand, right? So here inside the car, I put the only information is the brand. I have the get brand name that I can get the brand back, right? And here, I'm creating the brand in a different way. We have also this brand class here. The brand class here just keep the name, so it's pretty simple, right? You just have get name, set name, and we are saving the name for the class. So the class just keep name. And here it's different because car can't extend the brand. Brand is not something. It's not something that's abstract to car. It's actually an attribute of the car. So car is something abstract to M340, and maybe vehicle or something like that could be the parent of car. But brand is something different. Your brand is not something abstract to the car. It's actually information about the car. So for because that, we need to create a new brand like this way. So we are going to create a new class brand and set the name. Set the name of the brand here. And then we have the option to get brand name. So what I'm saying that if you use now my car, get brand name, I'm going to receive BMW. If I use the same thing for your car and I use get brand name, it's going to receive BMW. So now we have in the memory 4 different classes. My M340 classes, there's a space in the server there, it's using the memory. Your, it's there. And also there's one different class for each one brand. Now, even the brand is the same, it's BMW, it's created a new class brand for my car and a new class brand for your car, right? So that's something that if we're going to create this framework about cars, we should fix. Because if we both have the same car and the only difference is the color, I can use the same class, right? We could share the same class. And the only difference between us could be just the color, right? And maybe just use one space in the memory. And here, if you check, for example, the information, it's hard-coded. I'm sending BMW hard-coded. But in most of the real scenario, that would come from the database. So in our case, would be twice connecting to the database to get the information of the brand. One for me, one for you. But both are BMW. Why not just get once the information from the database? So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to change this to make this open just once. For that, I created here inside module di a new class. I call that object manager, right? So I will require it here too. It's module di object manager. So now I can start using this. I will call that di, and it will be a new object manager, right? So this object manager is coming from this file here. And this object manager, I create inside it 2 methods. One, it's create, and another one is get, okay? I'm going to use get for now. So my car will be get. I still want this class, M340. So I could send it as a string. Actually, the get is asking a string. Or I can make something like this. Any class that you use something like this in the end, it will get the path of the class and the class name as a string. So what I'm saying here is that my car, I want to get from this method, I want to get the M340 from this class, my car. But I didn't use new M340 like before. Now I'm asking to object manage do that for me. And same for your car. So your car is also going to be something like this. So let's see what this get does. Here's the object manager I created, I put inside here. And we have, like you see, get and create. And we have here just inside the object manager one variable. And the one is called cherry, and it is an array. So every time you use get and the class name, it's going to check inside this array if this class is already there. If I already used this method before, the class will be there, right? So we just need to return it. If not there, so if the class name is not, we're gonna then save inside it, and we will create this class. And the function create is simple. Just receive the class name, new, and the class name. So In this case, it will receive M340, and this will return new M340, so it's going to create a new class, and will return. So get, check if it exists. If it exists, return the one that exists. If not, it's going to create a new one, and save in char. So the second time it's going to be getting from char. My car and your car are using the same class. So inside the memory, it's just using one space there. Because the first time I call it, it's creating. So my first time, it's not inside shared. So it's going to be here, not, and it will create for the first time and save there. But when I created your car, since I already had created mine and they're the same, it's going to get directly the class itself saved there, okay? A good moment to show you a few things about the PHP program itself. So for example, here we have the class, right, M340, and by inheritance, we are getting data from this abstract car. So everything that we have inside car, we are using inside M340. So I'm going to say something that you probably already know, but for example, get color, it's the kind of public, because I can go here anytime and use my car, get color, for example. I can use it from outside of the class itself. And when it's private, it means that I just can run inside here. So I have, for example, something here, and this something just can be called inside other method here of my class. So I can run this something that I just created from car, let's say. And that's the difference to protected. When we use something like protected function ABC, for example, I can call from here, so I'm inside the same class, ABC, and I can also call from car, because it's inside the same inheritance environment, you know. So I can use here, for example, it's going to work. And I could also create something protected here, and I could use inside M340. So protected, it's going to work just inside this inheritance object itself, and private just inside this specific class. So even if you're extending something else, private just work here. It's not going to work to the parents or children or whatever. And public works everywhere. Public you can use here, you can use inside it, or you can use outside like we saw. Okay, so these concepts you already know, but what I want to talk about here is that inheritance way that we created here. It's not how Magento is going, you know, it's not how the direction of Magento is going right now. Magento likes to use composition. So try to always avoid this inside Magento. Try to not create abstract class and make something like this. I always prefer composition. How composition works? Inside the car, we have a composition example, brand. So composition is basically, we have the object itself inside our variable, and it's not extending anything here. So everything that you need, you're going to have the variable inside here, and you get this variable by the construction. Okay. In my case, I'm creating here, so I'm creating the brand here inside the construct. But of course, in Magento, we don't need this because we're going to receive this brand already initialized. So I always prefer this way. This way, it's called a composition. It's when you have the information. So in this case, the car itself would not exist, and everything that's like brand, whatever, would be like here. So we don't use here, we don't extend stuff in Magento normally. Okay. You can use that, it's not an error, but for many places, like for example, controllers or actions, it's the best to always use composition and not using inheritance anymore, okay? So this is one concept I had to say, and there are many other concepts that I want to show you here. So you can see here in index that I actually importing this class, right? So let's make with this object manager, for example. Here I'm using require, so it means that I'm telling to PHP that it needs to check inside this folder, model.ti object PHP, this folder, right? So once it checked inside it, it saw, PHP saw that there is a class called object manager, and then I could use it. If I remove this, it will not work because it doesn't know where this object manager is. It's not loaded here, you know, and we need to, in normal PHP, always use this require. But as you saw in Magento, that doesn't work this way. In Magento, you can normally just create a folder here. So let's say something, and just create a class. I'm going to call this class. So you just create something like this. I'm not requiring anything from index here. Let's say I don't need anything like this, and I could anytime use new ABC, and that would work. So how that works inside Magento? We already have a class about composer, but I just want to say that it's using this is using composer. Let me show you inside the Magento how that works. Okay, right now here's the Magento project. This one I'm not using composer to install Magento, so a few things are in different place. I'm going to talk more about this later. But what I want to show you is the composer. As you know, composer it's a code that you can run here like composer install. And we already had a class about this, right? But when you run composer install, it's going to get all the information from this composer JSON and all the name of the class here. And it's going to download it. So there's PHP code there that's going to download and put inside this vendor folder, okay? And what's nice here, it's because inside the vendor folder, not just a folder for each package that you put in that file, it's going to be there, but it also will always create this autoload.php. What this autoload does, it is a sequence of require. So the same way we had in our code that require M340 for the car, this autoload has require, and there's a a code here with require for everything. So for each one of these folders here, this autoload PHP is running require for each one. So it's loading everything. And at the same time, inside the composer, you're going to see that it has a few different configurations. You can see here that we have folders. So what I'm telling to composer, I don't want just all this package here and you put inside the vendor. I want you also to check inside these folders. So I'm telling it to check inside the app code. So it's going inside app code and check for all the PHP here and load them. So I'm telling them this. I'm telling them to check also in generated code. So it's going to generated code and load everything. And now that all these files loaded, it's inside this auto load here. So let's go back to our project. Okay, so in our project, if we had installed, for example, M340 or even Object Manager by Composer, we would have a folder called vendor. And inside this folder, we would have something called autoload.php. And inside this autoload, it's going to use, it has already in Composer a configuration that says it needs to check the whole module, in my case here, the whole module folder here. So in other words, it would be something, let's say, require, since I'm inside vendor, I need to go back one folder, right? Inside module and one by one, brand, car. So basically that's what autoload does. It does requiring everything. So here inside the project itself, we're just going to use one simple require. Just one require for vendor autoload. So vendor, so the composer that creates this file, every time you run install again or update, whatever, it's going to recreate this file if the right required inside it. So that way you just need to use once, and from now on you don't need to use any import anymore because they're already all imported. It doesn't mean that the class itself it was imported, So for example, here our autoload, it's already loaded our object manager, but the object manager itself, it's just a class like this. And since it's not being used for anywhere, it's not going to the memory. It's just there like a file in a folder or something like that. So Magento knows it exists, but the only moment that it goes to the memory is when I use new object manager. So I'm creating this new object in my memory, and it knows that object manager exists because required got it from here, and it will really load anything from it. So what I'm saying that it's Composer inside Magento gets all the PHP from the folders specific there, and create a giant require. So it's going to require, if you check there inside Magento, it's more than 1,000 files. But that doesn't mean that it's using memory to load all that. It's just going to the memory if I instantiate, if I start using that class. So once I'm using that, okay? So this is one concept. And now I'm going a little bit more deep about Object Manager. I created here Object Manager like you saw. That our object manager is pretty simple. Just have get and create. And we're going to see that inside Magento, we have class with exactly the same name. That's called object manager, and it also has get and create. And get and create there works exactly like this, and they also have this array shared like this. So it's exactly the same thing, just it's a little bit more complex and it has more things, and that's what I'm going to show you now inside Magento. So here we are inside the Magento project itself. My project here right now, I got a clone from Magento repo. So a few things are different. Normally, when you create a project, you're going to install Magento using Composer. So basically, you're going to have the Magento itself as a Composer element here, and you're going to run Composer install. So all the Magento is going to be installed inside the vendor folder. So inside vendor, you have Magento, and in your case, if you install it by Composer, it's going to be here. I just got a clone from repo because I prefer that when I'm studying, but of course it's not the best practice because everything that you would have inside vendor, I have here inside code, so app code Magento, and I have the modules here. I like this way because they separate things well. For you there, if you use a Composer, this Magento, all these directories are inside vendor Magento. In my case, it's inside here. It's not good for a project, but because since it's inside app code, someone can think that can change something here, but you can't touch anything here. So because it's from Magento, right? And I like here because it has the framework of Magento as one thing and the modules as other things. So all these guys here, they are Magento modules. Even they are something really important for Magento itself, like for example, you have a module for EAV. That's something we see in our video about database, for example. And okay, so we have all the module itself of Magento here, but the framework itself, it's inside library, internal Magento. That's in my case because I did a clone from repo, right? But in your case, the library, it's also inside vendor. So for you, if you're using Composer, of course, inside vendor, Magento framework, you're gonna see there. And in my case, I have it separated here. I prefer this way. So you know they are two different things, okay? So this is the framework itself. It's like the object manager I was creating there. It's parts of the framework of my car were there, right? Here we have a framework of Magento. So inside here, the rules of Magento, they are a little bit different because you have to do different things here. And like you know, if you install by Composer, it's going to be vendor Magento framework. And if you install like this, just cloning like I did, it's here. There's also, you're going to see here somewhere, Composer file that it has this information. It needs to be vendor Magento framework, okay? And everything that's the other composers that's used in the project. Inside framework, you're going to slowly during this videos check most of the items here. But we have, for example, database connections and many nice things here, right? But the one I'm looking for is the object manager. It's the one that we were studying in this video, right? So inside object manage, we have the object manage itself. It has basically the two methods publicly here. We can check this by the interface. That's going to be easy way to see, or you can check directly in the code. But the public methods we have, it's create and get. And you already understand how that works, right? We have here the shared instance. I call that shared. Here, their shared instance. And when you use get, it's checking if the shared instance of what you send here exists. If it does, it's get from it. You know, it's going to get from this array. If not, it's not the case. It's going to create it. So it's going to use this create method that uses this factory here. Okay, so I just want to show you first a little bit about this structure. So Magento itself also has object manager and it's inside the framework. Okay, so back into the code now. Okay, we are back to our code, and I want to show you something more. Okay, in our case we had our DI here. I need to go back the code here a few times until I have again what we had like this. Okay, so we had here my car and your car, right? Let's check here. My car has get color, but let's create another public to set the color. Okay, set color and receive the color, and the color will be equal color. So we're gonna change the color of the car. So in this case, my car, if I set my car set color black, your car, if I use my car or your car, doesn't care. Both will be black. So if I use something like this, it's going to be black. If I use your car, it will be black too, right? So if you set my car black and your car blue, this is also a problem because my car will be blue too. Why? Because we created with get, so we are sharing the same guys here. Okay, so the way I created this is not the best approach. In this case, it's one of the few cases that we need to use create, and there are a few ways to do that, and that's something I will show you slowly here. So I will change this to be how it would be inside Magento. Okay, inside Magento we would have something like this. Also ignore everything that comes from 15 lines 1 to 15 here. We would have our, let's say this is a page that will list my car in your car. So it's a controller. So it needs to be inside a folder called controller. And I will call this list cars, okay? And inside Magento, we can do something like this: public constructor, public function construct, and we want to use M340, right? So we can do something like this: M30 car, okay? And I can just use car here, and it's already right. So what I'm telling you is that inside Magento, we don't need to use new. We don't need to do something like car equal new car, because we don't know who is starting this method, you know. So some way, somewhere, there's a new list cars that is sending a new M340, something like this, but we don't have access to that, because who is doing that? Who is printing list card? It's the object manager. In our case, I'm creating here with no parameters, but there are parameters here when creating this new class. And what Magento does, how object manager of Magento is much better than the one I created here. It's going to check the code of what we're starting, what we are getting. So every time you create a new guy here, it's not like this, not like new and the guy itself. First, it will load the code of this file. So let's say we are receiving here create car, create M340, and it's saying I want to create this class, create. So in the object manager of Magento, it's using create and receiving. Until now, I did something like this, like you know, I just created a new M340 that's receiving from here. But that's not how Magento does. How Magento does is simple. It's not simple, actually, it's complex, but it's simple to understand. It will load this file. So it will get the M340, and it will open and read this file. And it will check what it has inside construct. So in this case, it has string color, so it's array. So it knows it will load this guy first, and when created, it's going to send here already the color in that case. Okay, so it's something more complex. And to load it and get information about the class itself, Magento use reflect. And let's take a look about reflection. So reflection, it's a PHP class. It comes from the PHP core. And reflection, it's a class that's used in many different languages. So it's not just PHP, but most of the language, they have a class called reflection. And how that class works, it's quite simple. So for example, here, they gave an example. They created a class called A. They just gave the simple name A. And they are using here this guy, this variable A, it's a new A, so it's a new class like this. And they're using this class called reflection class and sending as a string the A. So it's exactly like we use when we use create or get, we send as a string. They're just saying that reflection class, it's sent as parameter, the name of the class that it wants to know more about, okay? So it has here, for example, get properties. So it's going as the end of this, it doesn't show here the result, but get all the properties of this class. And if you check more about the reflection class, I mean PHP website, it has many nice methods here. You can create a new reflection class, send the class you want to know more about, and you can get information. You can get all the constants inside it. You can have constructor, get everything that's inside constructor. That's something Magento use. You know, many things here. You can get the methods, chart names, so a lot of information. So basically what reflection does, not just in PHP, but we have this in C#, C++, and many other languages, it gives information about the file. about the class itself, like the source code. And it doesn't mean that the A in that example was already used. You can use this for, a class that you didn't use yet. So let's go back to Magento. So here inside Magento, inside the framework of Magento, you're going to see, we already saw a little bit about Object Manager, right? It's here, but we also have the reflection here. So it's Magento extending the class reflection of PHP, and it has all the methods here. So, you can get, there's methods map, and it gets a lot of information here. It's extracting information about the class itself. You can check this better later, but for now, just I want to tell you what this reflection means here. Reflection, it's used by Object Manager to understand better the class that it needs to instantiate. So when you use get or create an Object Manager, you're going more deep. You're using reflection inside Magento to detect inside the constructor of the object that you're creating what you have to also send to the chariot. So let's go back to our code, creating this M340, right? So inside this M340, it has this string color. That's something simple. But let's say we also need to have brand here, right? Like we had before. You remember we had car, but I told you that we shouldn't expand car here because that will be inheritance, and we prefer to use more composition. So let's have private brand here, and it's brand. Since I'm not using composer here right now, I need to also import brand here. And okay, so we have brand here. And let's say that we want to receive the brand here. And now we say that this brand, the brand one we have here, it's equal the one that you got when creating the object. Oh, I did something strange. Brand equal brand, okay? So this brand is the one that's used. In our case, we are just creating this way, but let's say that we need to have, when creating this guy, we need to have the brand and we need to have the color. But I didn't send this information, right? I didn't send it here. I just said that my car needs to be created. And I want that Object Manager does the rest, like Magento works, In Magento, it will create this guy, and reflection will check here the construct, and it will see that it needs brand and string. The string, it will basically ignore, or maybe there is an XML with specific information that needs to come to this string, or if not, it's going to be empty. And objects like this brand, it needs to create too. So what I'm saying here, I'm saying that every time we use our Object Manager inside Magento, and it's a get, it doesn't go easy like this. So when it's creating this guy. So here, for example, it's created the M340. It will use reflection to open the M340 class. So it will open this guy, and it will check inside the constructor what we have there. So we have brand. It will check inside the chariot if brand is something that it's already there, so it's okay. If not, it's going to create brand 2. So it's going to use like this. See, this create, in this case, it's going to use brand. So it will save, it will create like a loop of everything that's necessary here. So that's the magic of Object Manager inside Magento. We can easily just put here new classes, and the Object Manager itself is going to take care of that using reflection. It's going to, when created, it's going to check the file, check what's necessary to be created, it's going to be created. Okay, so that's how reflection is used inside Magento. But this is just a simple thing about, this is just one level that Magento Object Manager is better than the one that we created here. There are many other levels. Magento accepts you change the name here. So let's say our class is called brand, right? So you can here put something after the brand to give specific information for the Object Manager. So we could, for example, create here brand and type factory. Okay, so what that would do? This class itself doesn't exist, right? It's not a class that exists. The class I have, it's just brand. So I put the word factory after the word brand because I want to say that I don't want to reuse the same one. I don't want to get from, when Magento use this, I don't want to use the get function. I want to use create. So I want a new brand. I don't want to share this brand with any other guy, any other class. For that one, we use this factory. In Magento, it's going to create a new class that's going to be called brand factory, and it will create inside the generation folder we're going to check this inside Magento in a few seconds. But the only thing that I want to say that this class that generated there will be a new class called Brain Factory. And this class will have a method called create. So we still need to do something like a new brand equal this brand that's a factory, create, something like this. So from now on, you can always use this new brand, and it's a totally new object, so it's a new space in the memory and all those things. It's not sharing this guy with any other because we use factory in the end of the guy. So inside Magento, we don't need to create the factor like a different. We can put this word in any guy. What the object manager is doing, it's when creating this guy, and reflection goes there and check that one of the classes that we had inside the constructor was Brander Factory, or could be any other one. It's going to search for the word factory, so it's a string search of the class name. And if there is factory, it knows that it needs to get from generator. If it doesn't exist that, it needs to create this class factory, and it will use this one, and not brand itself, but brand factory, another class that was created by Magento. Here in Magento, for example, in our case, we had that class M340 that we send object manager as get, and object manager checked this class and checked that inside construct we have the brand factory. So we have the class brand, but we don't have brand factory. And we're never going to create any factory itself. Magento is going to create for us. So if I put there, for example, brand 123, the object manager of Magento is going to say that, oh, this class doesn't exist. It would be an error. But if I use brand factory, it will detect the word factory. So every time you use this specific word factory after it will detect it, and it will create this class for us. Actually, it's going to create the PHP file itself with that class. In Magento, always create these files, these files for these specific things inside the word generated. Okay, so if you check inside generated code, you're going to see the files there. The framework that Magento used is Laminas. Laminas is a framework. We could open here the website itself. They have a framework with many different things, but Magento use more this Laminas code generation. So Laminas code generator is a way to create the PHP file, and it's quite nice. Let's see if we see a good example here. It's not showing something cool. Let's check introduction here. Inside the introduction, oh, this one is good, okay? So it's going to use the Laminas code generator, file generated, and it's saying that it needs a class, and the class needs to be this, and send out the parameter and everything that you need. And with this generate, you have the code. It's going to create the PHP code itself. It's going to put everything there. All the code, the same code that we were creating until now, it's going to create for us. And it just saves this generated code inside the PHP file, and you have the file there. So Magento used this Laminas to create this PHP files inside generated folder, okay? So back to Magento, you see here generated folder with many files inside it. As you know, it used the Laminas to create that. And let's see here, for example, a good example of when they use a factory inside Magento. Here I have all the Magento modules for you if you install a bad composer, maybe inside vendor, Magento, and the same folders you have there. Let's search for the word factory. Okay, so here we have an example. Apply persistent data observer. Just got any random file here. It's observer, so it's an event, but doesn't care. This class itself is being created by object manager of Magento. And this file, this class itself, just Magento persistent module, persistent config exists. Let's see if we find it. Persistent module, persistent config here. So this file itself, it exists, but the guy doesn't want to use the config, the same shared config, maybe it was used somewhere else. The guy that created this want to use one just for him. So he put this word factory here. So when the I check this, it's going to create the class factory inside the generated folder. So let's find it. So it's generated code here, Magento, right? So here is the vendor. So if you get, any third party, it's going to be third party name here. And what's the name? It's persistent. So let's find this. It's here, persistent, and it's a model, and it's persistent again. And here it is, config factory. So what the I did, created this file, use a Laminas like we saw, and it didn't create the config itself. It created the config factory. In our case, it didn't create a brand, but brand factory. And this code here, it's all created by laminas. So you see that they put doc type and everything. Really cool here, right? And the only public function that you see here is the create. And how create works, like I showed in the brand, it will create, it use object manager with create to do that. Okay, so in our code, we're gonna see that when we use, let me find here, when you use factory, the brand itself is gonna have this method create, and create is like object, it's getting object manager again, and create this new brand, and I can use this new brand here how I want because it's a new file there. We already saw that you could use, for example, factory in the end of the file, but there are many other things that you can play around with the DI or this object manager way to create dependency injection. So the best way to see these things, it's by a file called di.xml. So this file, for example, here, like I have here the modules of Magento. I'm going to open catalog, because catalog it's a good module inside Magento to check things. It's really complete. It has many things. Inside the etc folder, we find di.xml. So this di.xml, as almost all the XML files, as you already know, it's going to be inside the etc of the module. And you can use, of course, in the etc folder, or you can go directly in a more specific area. So if I put the di.xml inside admin HTML, for example, this DMI is just going to work when I go to the back end of the Magento. There's front end, so it's when you access the website. There is, in this case, tool for API, REST and SOAP. Could have also GraphQL here, or you can even create your own area. So the di.xml that's in the etc folder work for any area. So, or you can change something specific by area. So that's something you already know, of course. And here I'm going to talk about this file di.xml. So every time you see this file di.xml, it's talking about what we saw in this video. So everything we have here, it's about our current video. So di.xml always starts with a config. So it's a config tag, and inside it you can have preference, or you can have type, and virtual type, it's another one. So we're gonna see a few of them. So it's pretty easy to understand, right? For example, preference. Preference, it says that for this class, I want to use this class. So when we use the di get function, let me open here. It's inside, in my case, library, internal, Magento, framework, object manager, and the object manager itself, it has that function get. For example, when I send here to get this class, I want to object manager ignore this class and send me this one. So it's quite nice. You can use for many things in many ways, this one. So every time, for example, let's say I want to overwrite the full class. This class was created by a third-party company, and I want to totally replace it. Preference, it's a little bit slow in terms of how it works in Magento. So if you can do things by plugins, prefer that. Don't use preference. But if it's that you're doing what they're doing here, it's by interface. It's setting the class. That's a good use for preference. Okay, we can talk more about this later. But just want to show that in the di.xml you can do more advanced things with this object manager. So if I get something that inside di it's saying that it's this class, I want di creating actually this class, so ignoring the first one. That's if the object manager, since di.xml it's in etc folder, that's going always replace. But if it was in the area, let's say admin HTML, that just will change in the backend, not in the front end. So so preference, here you can see in catalog we have a lot of preference. They're using this a lot. Here we have changing the arguments. That's something nice too. So basically it's saying that for this data provider, every time the di.xml create by get or by create, whatever, this guy here, it needs to send for this construct argument this value. In this case, it's sending another object, okay? But could be a string, for example. So I'm going back to our code pretty fast just to show you this. So for example, here we had in our M340, we had Brain Factory. So like you saw, it's a factory created by Brain, but we have this caller. And this caller, we didn't say anything, so it doesn't know how to start this. So it would start empty because we didn't say that. And that inside Magento, let me go back there. Inside Magento, let's say, for example, this data provider here was actually my M340. I could have an argument here. And the name of argument is the name that's inside there. It was caller, right? The variable name is caller. The type was string. And I could put here, for example, let's say blue. So every time you start using that M340 class, it will start with that variable color being blue. So you're setting this by DI. And here in type, I can send array, I can send other things. I put string because it was a string. And this guy here put object because it's sending another object. You can change that. That's something cool too. So for example, let's say we had our remember caller and we had brand, but I don't want to use brand. I want to use, let's say, this guy here. So I can change that. I can put here the name brand. So that variable brand, it's actually going to receive this object and not it's going instantiate that brand object. It's going to use this object. So I'm changing the argument of a type. That's something in terms of memory and processing. It's something fast to do. So it's a good thing to change this way. Preference, try to avoid, just if really necessary. And also prefer to always use with interface and not a normal way. I think I can now explain pretty fast what this interface means. So I'm going to do this now pretty fast. Back into our code, I want to talk about interface. Okay, so there's something. It's in PHP itself. It's called interface. So prefer always to create a folder called API inside your application, and inside it you can create the interface. So let's create an interface for M340. Normally the name is going to be M340 interface.php, and here you're going to create an interface, M340 interface. And this guy here you're going to explain everything that it does. So it has this public get caller, and it has this set caller. Okay, so you have interface here, right? The interface that's inside the API folder, it's basically just like this. It's just explaining all the methods that this class has. You could have, for example, a constant here, so something equal ABC, and you could use something there if you want. I'm gonna keep this just to show you this later. And inside the class, you have to say that you're using that interface. So you use that by implement. So you're going to say that this class is implementing this interface. So interface name, it's like this. In Magento, we normally get the same class name, and we put the word interface after it. So basically what I'm saying is that this class respects this interface, okay? So like we had here something, you could also use here somewhere, something like this, this something. You can use the constant here. But the rest here, we just have methods. So you can also create another method but here first. So let's say something like this, something, and it will return string, let's say. And if you go back here, you see an error because you're implementing this interface, but this method doesn't exist here. If you go here and use PHP Storm like I'm using here, there's a way to automatically create that. Oh, let me remove it, abstract. Let's add this method or something. And it's going to create for us here. So as you see, the class needs to respect the interface. So the class needs to respect the interface. So the name that Magento gave to this idea to use interface for class, it's a contract, right? So this is a service contract. And what that means, for example, imagine that you're going to hire someone to work in your company. In this contract that you have with this person, you put a few things there that this person needs to do. So let's say you're hiring someone, and you put in a contract that this guy needs to work 9 to 5. So that's something that's really important. That's never going to change. So it's in contract. And there it would be something like this. Would be a method or information here saying that this guy needs to work 9 to 5 every day. Okay, so since this is a side interface, that's never can change. Another person that work with you can change that because it's in contract. It's in service contract. Okay, so how service contract works in Magento? Every time we use in Magento many modules from third parties. Even in Magento, if you check Magento is a kind of Frankenstein. It uses a lot of third-party modules inside it, and all these third modules inside Magento, if they have an interface, they can put rules there. So here inside the interface are all the methods that they don't want us to change because it's part of the, it's part of the what the module is. So this module M340, it needs to have a get caller and set caller. So don't touch this, because if I in the future release an update for this, I have an updated version of my M340, I need to be sure that this method is gonna be there, and the upgrade is gonna work fine. Okay. So what I'm saying here, we have a contract that's not gonna change. I can go here in the class and create new class. If you do that, something like that, it's gonna work, right? You can use it normally here and not put inside the interface because this is something I changed. Okay. So many times in your life, you're gonna extend or override something from a third-party module, but you have here the contract, the service contract of all the methods that you don't want to change. Also, when you're creating you still don't have the module and you're creating the design of the module, imagine how that's going to work. You start by interface, So let's say my M340, it's that car. And for sure I need a way to set an engine for it. So I do something like this, set engine. That will receive engine, something like that. Also a way to get the engine. See, I still don't have these methods. I'm gonna think about them later. So every time you start creating a module, you start from interface. You create all the interface, and then you start thinking about the class themselves. So interface is something nice, and it's always good when you use inside a construct here. You use the interface here. So you can use, for example, that doesn't make sense because it's the same one. So let's make this in another one. Let's say inside the car. It's just an example, okay? So don't take this so serious. So we're gonna use the interface here and call this something like this, And we start using the method and everything else. You can see there's get caller, etc. We are using the interface, not the class itself. And you can, let's go back, and you can do like they did here. You use a preference to say that interface is related to that class, So you use the interface inside the constructor, and you use a preference to make a connection between the interface and the class itself. Of course, this class also has class mass action implements mass action interface inside the code, and also it's saying here that the I understand that every time it sees this interface, it needs to use this guy here, okay? And this one, it's using a plugin. A plugin is something nice to see too. Let's see this pretty fast. Let's go back to our code. So here in our code, we have the M360, right? I'm gonna remove this. And let's say this M340, it's a module from a third party. I didn't create that. So let's say I installed this by Composer, and it's inside vendor. We never can touch a code inside vendor, okay? It's Composer, we never touch that. So I'm going to extend this. To do that, I'm going to create a plugin inside my module, okay? The plugin is going to be something like this. We normally create a folder, call it plugin. The first character is normally, uppercase. I didn't do this in the other ones here, but just so you understand. And my plugin, I could call, normally we call with the same name, but could be anything. I'm gonna make something like this, M340 plugin. It's like this. Okay, so I'm gonna create a class here. The class will be the same name, M340 plugins. And how that work? I want to create a plugin, and I want to change this get caller. So every time I use get caller of this class, it will return the color. Let's say the color is white, for example. But the white, it's lowercase. and I want every time the return of getColor be uppercase. So I can use something like after. So I get the same method here, and I use here. And what I'm going to do, I want to use this after. So you just, the same way that Magento detected the word factory, like I said before, it will detect the word after, or it can be around, or can be before the method name here. But I'm going to use after now. So every time I use getColor, it's going to come here and getColor and return a string. And now we have a plugin. So we are creating a plugin for this getColor. So after goes here, it goes to my function. So the result comes here. The result is basically the result that's returned here, okay? In this case, it's a string. And here I can return, let's say I want to make this uppercase result, okay? So now if I use something like this, my car getColor, if I was receiving white, now I'm gonna receive white. How that works? It's going to first call the getColor here, and after that, with this result, it's the DI is gonna call the other one that's after getColor. It's gonna call that one with this result, and it will make uppercase, okay? But how I connect, how Magento knows that this plugin I created, it's related, I want to use it, for example. Inside Magento, we have this type with plugin. So in this case, they have visitor here, but it would be M340. Here, the whole path for namespace, but M340. And I want to say I want to use a new plugin. I can give any name here. So let's say M340 plugin, but could be any name I want. And here is the path to that plugin. So it's M340 plugin. So just make something like this inside your DI XML. So it knows that every time we talk, we get anything from this class here, it needs to detect the plugin we created here, okay? So that's how we use plugins. Okay, so you have type here, argument that you already know. It's when you change the class itself. And this guy did two things at the same time with data provider. It changed the argument and also create a plugin for it, okay? So type plugins and everything else here. Here we have this product that has many arguments. One of them is array. Array receive children. So every children of array tells here. And so yeah, basically you already saw everything, right? There's another one that's here. Where is that? It's a virtual type. Virtual type, it's when you want to create a copy of that class. So you already have this class category image upload, and you're going to create, actually you're going to get the image uploader, and you're going to create a copy of this class. It's going to be Magento category image upload, you know. So now you have a new class, didn't exist before, and it's this one, and this class is a copy of this one, but you're going to change it a little bit by arguments. So you're going to say that every time I call this guy here, the arguments will be like this. So in our case, for example, we could make something like this. For the brands, or better, for the M340, I'm going to create a new class called M340 blue. And that one, the arguments, you have an argument of type string, like this one, that the color will be blue. So I think you got the idea, right? If I use M340, I'm going to use my class. If I use M340 blue, the name of the class be this one. It's going to be like this one, but the argument already is going to start being blue. You know, the color is going to be blue inside the construct. So virtual type lets you create classes from, you know, just copying one data from one class and changing something inside it. So virtual types are really nice. Normally, we use this to inject in another class. So we use, for example, virtual type here, and we use, for example, type here, and we say that for this argument, that's object, we want to use the blue. See, so inside the constructor of this guy, we have a variable there, image uploader, and the object that we receive is actually this one that we created here in the XML folder. So you don't need to create a class or something like that, okay? So we saw everything about the I guess. We saw about plugins. Here they're using a lot of plugins, so a lot of files. But you can have multiples. Like I use after get color, I guess, right? I could use after many others, or before many others, or around many others inside the same file. You just have one file. But in this case, this guy created 4 of them, 4 files. So basically, we saw all this. And now I want to show a little bit of what we saw here in terms of the generated folder, right? So let's take a look. The whole code we have here, for example, type or something like that, Magento will not create a file inside generated, okay? So for example, if I change the argument, in this case, for example, I have the category of this layer, and I'm saying that for the context, so inside the category, you're gonna see that probably inside the construct we have somewhere here, what was the name? This context. So for this context, I don't want to use this context interface. I want to use this guy. So this object is going to be, when it creates this category, it's going to send this object as the first parameter, okay? So the DI, when I use the object managed get, it's going to just send this guy when created this. So it doesn't need to create any file inside generated to make a type. The same for virtual type, Let's find any virtual type here. So for example, this virtual type, just every time that I send to object manage get or create in case I'm using factory. So every time I use this guy, I'm using collection and it's a virtual type, it's just going to send this in the place, I don't need a code for that. Just with the get, receive this, I will send actually this. And I could, of course, this is a better use of virtual type. Virtual type normally would change the arguments. So every time I send this to get of object manager, it's going to send this in the place. And when creating this, so new, this guy, and parentheses, inside the parentheses for the constructor, it's going to use this array for the metadata. So here probably in constructor we have metadata here, it's an array. I'm going to use this parameter if I use this guy and not this one. So the virtual type it's not really a class. The class doesn't exist anywhere. It's just the DI during the get that is going to change this one for this one, okay? The only one that really is going to create a file inside generated is the plugins. So let's check the plugins. How plugins work inside the generated, it's simple to understand, okay? It's a little bit complex how they created the code, but to understand it's pretty simple. For example, here we are using this plugin for this class, right? So we have this class exists, this class is here. And for this one, we are going to use this one. I'm going to select another plugin because I saw that one was not good. This config one, okay? Let's use this one. This one looks good. So for this class, we are using this plugin. This plugin, let's take a look at it. It's around, okay? So we could use after, like we already did. We could use before or around. And here's the original method. It's get attributes using in listing. So if I check from the original one, this config for sure, I'm gonna have a method with this name. So since it's using around it's the one that's going to replace the method itself. And I'm going to explain this in a second. Just let's go back here and let's check how that works. So Magento knows that when I use object manage get and I ask for this method, I need to think that it has a plugin. And the plugin is this guy. So what Magento is going to do inside generated, this file config, this is the class, and at the same time it's config.php, right? It's going to create a folder with this name. So let's say you have config.php. It's actually going to create a folder called config, and inside it, it's going to create a file called interceptor.php. And every time that I ask for this config, since Magento knows it has a plugin, it's not going to, the object manage get will not send the config. It's going to send the config/interceptor. It's going to send this guy. And this interceptor was created inside generated. So if we go there right now, so Magento catalog module, resource module, let's go there, code, Magento, catalog, module, resource module. Here we should define config.php, right? But it's a plugin, so config become a folder. See, it's not a file anymore, it's a folder. And inside the folder, we have this file interceptor.php. It's the one that Object Manager get will send in the place of this one. It's going to send this interceptor. And what this interceptor does, it extends the original one. So what it's doing, this interceptor created here, it's actually this original one being extended by interceptor. So interceptor, it's going to extend the original one. And also there is an interface here for interceptor, but you can ignore this because if I remember well, it's a pretty simple interface, not important. So the interceptor, so it's going to be config/interceptor. And the interceptor is going to extend the original one, okay? And here we are using a trait. I'm not sure if you know what the trait is, but inside PHP and many other languages, we have traits. So you can do something like this, trait, and could be, for example, something, or could be, let's say something like this. And the trait, it's a kind of Control-C. Let's say that you copied this guy. You copy the code itself. And every time that you use something, what I'm doing, I'm copying this code, that's a trait, and I'm pasting here. So trait is used just to have like, save code that you're gonna reuse in multiple places, in a place. So every time you see here inside interceptor, this is a trait. This is inside the library. So let's check inside the framework. So let's check inside the framework here, Magento framework. And there is a whole folder about interceptor, because interceptor is something easy to understand, but at the same time it's a little bit complex to the logic itself. It's complex. So there's a folder here in the framework called interception, and here we can find this trait. It's this guy. PHP Storm shows a different icon here represented. That's a trait. If you open, it's a trait called interceptor, and it has this code here, and this code is gonna replace this guy here. So every time you use in the IXML a plugin, it's going to create your file. It's going to be a folder. Inside it's going to create a file called interceptor. It's going to be a class. And in the first line of the class, inside the class, it's going to use that trait. It's the same one, the same code for all of them. And after that, it's going to recreate the methods, okay? So if you check inside generated, you're going to find many and many and many interceptors, because plugin is still the best way to extend something inside Magento. Try to not use around. We already use it after and before. They're a good one to use, but around they're not that good to use. So just use the plugin around when you really need it. That's almost never. So try to not use around. Okay. Inside generated, you're gonna see a lot of interface here. So if I not check and randomly open something here, it's a good chance that I find an interceptor like I found here. See, because they're everywhere. So that's the reason. I'm still having it open. That's the reason it's using trait, to not replace and not put the whole code again in all these 100 interceptors you have inside generated, or the file size of the project would be much bigger. So just reusing the code, and that's how it works. So like we said, we have now an interceptor for this guy. That's an interceptor, and it's using this trait. That's the common code for it. And here we have the methods that they have plugins somewhere. So we saw that for this config, it was created this plugin, and this plugin using around get attributes used in listing. So if you check interceptor, it created this function, this method here, get attribute user in listing. And as you know, I already explained before, and the reason I explained it before was thinking to explain this. We have public, private, and protected. So like we overwrite the construct. So if you have a function, if you have a method inside the parent, so the parent of interceptor is the original method, and we just use the same method again. So we have this, for example, get store ID, and we reuse it here. So we are using the same one that the parent had here. I'm overwriting. It's never going to call the parent one. Every time I use the interceptor get store ID, it comes from here. I can from here call the parent by parent and use here the original one and do something else if I want, or So that's the only way that I call the same method from the other ones. If I don't use this, I'm overwriting, and that's what this guy is doing here. I'm overwriting all the methods that I'm using plugins. So I'm overwriting the interceptor, so it's not going to call the original one. It's going to call mine inside the interceptor. So all the interceptors are created like this, with a trait, with a construct. They extend the original class, and here you have the methods that we are going to replace, okay? So the reason it just works for public in protection, it's because, like you know, the private just work inside the class itself. It doesn't work for the parent or the child. So if I create something private here and I create something private here, there are two different methods. They just work inside the class. Different than protected. Protected, it works. If I create here, I can call it from the child. If I create a child, I can call it from the parent. They work inside here. And public, I can work everywhere, even outside as an object, you know. So that's the reason plugins just work for protector and for public, because you're going to overwrite it. If it was private, it would not work, because private of this parent just work inside the parent. And if I create it again here with the same name, it doesn't have anything to do with the parent one, okay? So, like I said, plugins just for protected and public, okay? And here it's pretty easy to understand how it works. So we created, we didn't create it actually, I'm just checking this one. It's around get attribute user in listing. So we have here get attribute user in listing. The first variable, it's basically listing all the classes in an array that I need to check for this guy. It's basically something like this. Plugin info would be something like this, an array, and one of the elements, it's this one, it's this guy here. So let's copy reference. It will be something like this, you know. If there's other ones, other plugins in other DI XML inside Magento somewhere else, you're gonna have multiple values here, okay? So that's what plugin info does. This plugin list, it's a class, it's inside the framework. If you check there, it's inside framework, interception, and you have their plugin list, okay? Plugin list is something more complex to understand, but getNext is basically saying that it needs to find any method around, before, or after for this guy here, okay? And here's the result. It's basically saying, did you find something? So is this something? If it is, let's call them. If not, call the parent one. So it's going to use the original one that comes from the original class, and forget plugins, you know. So you have here like parent and the same class name, see? So if you found something, if there is somewhere, use it. If not, don't use it. And this call plugins, it's inside this trait here. Let's see this call plugins. Call plugins, it received the method. It's just a method name. So let's come back here. You see the first parameter, it's just a method name. And the last, you have here the arguments to use, you know. In this case, it's empty, but could have arguments here. You could receive something here, okay? And that's what it's sending at secondary parameter. And the last one, it's a list of all the class that I want to check for this method, okay? If there's after, get, or before, you know. And the call plugins does like this. It's going to get from this list of class, and it's going to check each of them if there is a method called before and the method name that comes from here, or if there is an around and the method name that came, and if there is an after. You know, we used the after before, right? And let's see the logic when we use after get caller in our example there. So it went here in the code, it didn't find before, and it didn't find around. So there is something here that when you don't have around, it's going to always call the original one. So that's what it did, because it was an after, it didn't have around. So it called the original one, called parent, so it got get caller. In our case, I think it was white, right? I don't remember the color one. So result here was white, lowercase, because it just used the original get caller. And now it checked there is an after, because there is a method called after get caller. And now it's called this method, sending the result that was white in lowercase as parameter. So we use the result there and we change to uppercase, remember? And that's the result of this call plugins that is using this interface and its return of this original method. So that's how it works. You know, if you think about it, it's really simple. It's not hard to understand it, but you know, you understand the concept checking by this. The trick is here. If you use around, it will detect that there is a method called around, and around is going to call the plugins, and also the original method, the parent method, is going to go as parameter. It's this next one that you see here. And you can call it from around. Let's check there, that one here. Let's find the around. You receive this guy, call it proceed here. You can of course change, use any name you want. It's a secondary parameter. And this guy, it's a method that you call. Every time you call proceed, you're calling the original one. So you can never call it. So you're going to replace with your code, or you can call anywhere here in the code and put something before or after you call it or not, you know. But around it's never a good idea. And the reason it's never a good idea, it's the logic here, you know. You have to check before, you have to, you know, send the original one here. The logic itself, it's not the best approach to use, so it's always good to use before and after. Okay, I'm back here to our M340 class to show you something else. We already saw that we could, for example, here use factory. So as you know, factory, it's telling to object manager to use create and not use get. So actually, the factory it's a class that Magento is going to create inside generated, and it has this public method create. That create, it's when you use create, it's actually going to use the object manager create and send me back a new one. So I could have new brand or new brand 2 because I use it twice. So every time I use it here, object manager send me a new copy of this. So they are not shared. They are two different objects here. But now that we saw that we could use factory, there's another one that I want to talk about, and this one is the proxy. The proxy is quite nice. To use proxy, you just need to use /proxy in the end. So here, the path of my class is pretty simple, but could be inside Magento would be like Magento something something something, and you had here the class you want, and you just use /proxy, and it becomes a proxy. And what's a proxy? A proxy, it means that this brand, let's put it like this, brand proxy. It means that this brand is not going to be really created. So it's going to be something that's not created yet. So just going to be created if I use a method of it. So inside brand we had, I forgot now, but I think we had get color, right? No, get name, I guess. Let's see. We had get name. So when I use brand get name, now the brand is created. See, if I don't use it, if I keep it like this, this brand never going to be created, proxy never going to be created. It's just going to be created if I start using brand. I can keep like this. I can even say that something equal brand, and the brand is still not created, still not in the memory. But once I use a public method of it, once I use something like get something, so that guy starts to exist just when I use something. And if I use, let's say, something too, the secondary one, this guy already exists, you know, the brand here already exists. So it's not going to do anything, you know. Just saying that it doesn't exist, why I didn't use it. And once I use something from it, it starts to existing. And how that works inside Magento. It's also not hard to understand, right? So let's check inside Magento if we find. So you just change the argument of this data, for example, could send resolver here, but I'm saying that I want to use the proxy version of this one. And what the DI of Magento is going to do when it receives proxy, it will detect first time that proxy doesn't exist, and it knows that resolver exists. So it knows that you want to create a proxy. So inside the generator, inside generated code, we can find this. So let's find it. Magento backend module, okay, and resolver, and we have the proxy. Okay, so this proxy, it's a file, proxy.php, that's going to be inside this guy. So resolver itself, it was a PHP, right? And it was resolver.php. So PHP started becoming a folder, and inside this folder, it's going to create a guy called proxy. That's why you can call it this way, you know. So it's like the plugin we just checked. That's going to create a folder for that file, and it was interceptor inside it. Here it's proxy. So it will detect that proxy doesn't exist, and it will create. Or if not, if it exists, it's just going to get from generated. Okay. So let's take a look how proxy works. It's not hard to understand. You know, it's something simple actually to understand. What Magento is going to do when create a proxy? It's going to use that reflector, that's one that we already saw. and it will get all the methods, all the public methods of the original class. So in this case, the original one is this resolver here, and it's going to check inside this class all the public methods, and it's going to replicate inside the proxy. So I have here all the methods. I have set locale, default locale, all this method, emulate, whatever. So this method exists here in the resolver. If you check here, we have here set locale, and the other ones coming from this because of the extending. So inside resolver, you have probably more public ones, and all of them are replicated inside our proxy here. Okay, and how that works? Pretty simple. Inside the construct, it's just gonna use. The construct is gonna be always the same. It's gonna use object manager. So it's going to use the same object manager forever. So when it's created by here, we can talk about this as next topic, but okay, the object manager is created, it's here, so it's using shared version of the object manager here, and there is a string here telling me what's this proxy is about, so what's the method this proxy should take care of. And there's just this, okay? And I have a copy of all the methods here. So every time I call a method, let's say I call get locale, it's going to create this guy. Until this moment, it didn't create, Until this moment, it doesn't exist. The class itself doesn't exist. But since it has the same method, once I call this method is going to be called for this get subjects, okay? And this get subjects is going to really create the method. If you check the get subject, something like that. If it was already created, send it the created version. If not, object manager is going to create it. See? So it's something simple to do. The way they did that, it's pretty simple, right? If I call get locale, it's going to create the object itself. If already exists, it's going to use the one that already exists, and then it calls the get locale from it. Before that, we didn't have the object itself. And also the proxy, it received the last parameter, shared. Shared just say that when you use that get subjects here, if it's shared, it's always going to use get of the object manager. If not, it's going to always create a new object. So every time you call a method here, it's going to be a new object. That's something bad to do, It's going to be shared by default. If you check here, it's by default. It's shared, okay? So it's pretty simple to do it, right? To understand it, right? Every time you use /proxy, it's going to create this guy and not the original one, not the original resolver. Resolver, it's because this example resolver, but the original class you are using the proxy, let's say the brand here, and it's going to replicate all the brand in our example methods here. So we could have here get color, set color, all the public methods. And if I use one of these public methods, it's going to really create the brand and use it from the created one. See, that's how proxies work. It's kind of simple, right? So I want to use this also to explain about object manager, okay? So one thing that everybody talks about Magento is that we never should use object manager, right? So what we learn, let me open an example here from app code, I don't know, any random one here, not a helper, it's never good. Never use helper, helper is something we don't use anymore in Magento. If you have helpers, put all this method inside model, don't use helper, okay? So I'm going to open here dashboard, for example. It's not a good one for many reasons. I should never extend action. I should use here composition, so never extend action. This is something doesn't work anymore. In abstract, also it's something we don't use in Magento. So I open a really bad example here. Let me open any other, just to say what I want to say. Also a bad example, gallery. Okay, this one is good, okay? So let's say we learned that we should never use object manager. And if I want to have a new method, a new class here, I just put the class name here, right? So let's say I want to have here, I'm going to use brand that we are talking about, okay? Brand. It doesn't exist here because I'm not in that project and the Magento itself. But I could use brand here directly because the object manager will initialize this for me and create it, right? But there are a few places you're going to see a guy using the object manager here in calling object manager something like this, and then using something get and sending here, in our case, brand, or if you want to send this as string like this, or you can use like this to convert all the path to string. Okay, so a few places you're going to see people using like this, and we learn, everybody knows that you shouldn't use object manager directly, okay, but it's not a problem. If I use like this, technically it's not a problem, you know. This object manager I'm using here, it's a shared one. See, I didn't use factor or something to say that should be a new one. So it's the same one that was used to create in this example gallery. It's the same one I'm using here. So if I use brand this way or use brand directly here, I'm doing exactly the same thing technically. So should work, okay? But the reason you shouldn't do it this way, it's just because that's not how Magento standard should look like, you know. So always use brand directly here. It's like a rule, you know. Don't try to understand rules. Rules, you just follow them. So it's a rule to make everything organized and everybody can create the code in a standard way and use the standard way. If you did like I did here, it's the same thing. So it means that all the plugins gonna work, all the factors gonna work, and everything else gonna work because it's the same thing then. But never use it. And even less, do something like this, like you know. Let's say object, it's equal new. This is something totally wrong, because if you start using get here, that shared array, you know that's inside here, it's a new one. This is a new object, and so that array, it's empty. This get's going to create again, and you're not using the same object manager that was used to this one. So should be here. Actually, it should not be here. Never use that. But just saying that if you use new, it's something still worse, you know. So don't think about that. Don't use object manager inside your code if you don't know exactly what you're doing. Okay, so you're gonna see inside tests and other place you're gonna see that, but it's you know, it's when you can use it. But put in your mind that you should never see object manager written anywhere here. You just create your guy from here. Okay. So now I'm going to explain something important. So what I'm going to explain here is it's about XML, okay? So we saw that we have DI XML in many places. If I open any of this, its module here, I'm going to find a DI XML. DI XML here, there's one probably here. They are everywhere. So what I'm trying to say is that, so every time I create a plugin somewhere, or I create a preference, you know, preference is when we want to replace one class to other one when using the gets or create of object manager. The object manager is not going to open all the XML in the code. They're not going one by one, all the files, reading the XML one by one and checking what to do, you know. That would be impossible. That would use, you know, a lot of memory. So for sure, there is a cache here, right? And where is the cache? The cache is inside generated 2. Until now, we just saw generated code. It's when Magento use Magento create the code there. Like you said, we have interceptor, we have factor, and we have proxy. So it's going to create these 3 kinds of file inside code, right? But we have this other one. It's metadata. This one, we have here a lot of information, a lot of important information. So most of these files, they are giant. So for example, this admin HTML, if I open, it's going to take some time to load because it's really big. Let's wait. Okay, it's still loading. It has a lot of lines. Sometimes it's not good enough to load all the lines. A few files. This one's not so big, so just 1,218 and 18 lines. A few of them, you're going to see that they have more than 10,000 lines. And actually, I opened the wrong one. I was trying to open this one and open the other one. But what I'm trying to say that inside its metadata, it's a replica of all the XMLs. So all the XMLs you have inside the modules, they have an array version inside here. And you know that inside the module, you could have, for example, let's open the catalog, etc. And inside the module one, we have this sequence here. So it's basically saying that everything, all the XML loaded for this module, that's Magento catalog, it needs to come after this guy. So this guy needs to be created first. So every time Magento create this generated metadata array here, it's going to create the array already using that rule. In this sequence of a module load, it's inside, you can find it inside app code config, app code etc config. Here we have all the modules, they are already in the sequence. So you remember Magento catalog that we just saw? It's here. And if you remember, inside the sequence, it said that should be after EAV. So it's in line 28. And where is there? It's here. It's in line 16. So it comes after that. So when created, when Magento is going to create these metadata files here, they are basically, all these files are basically a return of array like I have here. And the array here, it's something related to XML. They are respecting this module. They are loading this module from this config file list and respecting the sequence of that. So how you create this guy here? This guy, it's really necessary to be created, this metadata. So Magento is not going to check XML one by one. It's going to just load this guy here. We have one here, for example, interceptor. It's the one we were talking before. So it's basically, it's going to receive true or false. And true, it means that this guy has an interceptor. So every time the object manager tries to create a Magento store module store, it's going to check in this interceptor.php from generated metadata if it's true or false. Or in other words, does this class needs to check for interceptor, need to check for the plugins? True. So I'm not going to load this guy. I'm going to load this guy slash, I can type here, it's too slow. And so I need to use this guy slash interceptor, okay? And not this guy itself, because it already is here. And how this become true here? It's because it's got all the XML and generated this guy. Who is the one responsible to create this metadata here? It's the CLI command setup di compile. So here I'm inside my Magento folder, and you know we had this command bin Magento. So we have this bin Magento with all this command list. And one of the commands is setup di compile. So we were talking in this video about di, dependency injection, and we are saying that we want to compile. When you say about compile, what we are saying, create from the XML a class compile. So metadata is created from this command. If I press enter here, you're going to see that it takes some time. Let's wait until it starts. So when this is running, you're going to see that it has multiple steps here, right? Right now it's running the 1 of 9, and that changed in the last version. In the last versions, it was 8 steps. Now it's 9. It was 7 in the past. So this is different from each Magento version. But basically, each one of these, it's called a process. Okay. So we have here 9 processes. And the first one process, you're going to see that's repository code generation. So I'm going to console this, and I will show you where these nine guys are. So this is in a different place inside Magento. So it's not the framework, it's not the module, it's inside setup. So if you check inside the setup, here it's basically information about how to set up Magento store. So how to install Magento, how to run, or how to compile DI, like this case, and it's inside setup. If you check inside source, you have Magento, setup, and here we have DI. It's the one we're talking about, but I want to check module DI. So it's setup, source, Magento, setup, module, DI, and now app, I guess, and we have operation. So each one of these 9 steps, they are operations, okay? As a process, I guess, but it's operations, the name. So inside operation, you're going to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So they're all the 9 steps they have here. So remember, every time you run setup di compile, it's going to run all these operations. There is a guy here outside. It's operation factory, I guess. We can check the code itself. So the code itself, it's inside, also inside setup. So it's setup, source, Magento setup, and I think it's inside console command. And here probably you're gonna see setup di something. Let's find di compile command. Here's the command. So every time I run setup di compile, I'm running this long guy, this guy here. Let's find di compile. So yeah, this is the one, this file inside setup and all this long path, we have here the command line. So when we run this guy, we're running actually this file. It's the CLI, and it has the execute. It's the one that the method that runs that. And here we have the sequence of everything. So basically, it's going to use the get operation configuration, because like you saw, any one of those guys, they were operations. So we have 9 operations to run. And it's going to clean up all the files. Then it's going to run one by one and add to task manager. Task manager is a different class also here. The task manager, it's inside setup module DI app task manager. And the task manager, it's one that we can call all the class that it needs to run one by one, and it run in async mode. The reason it's run in the async mode, it's because it needs to every time update this progress bar here. So there is this guy progress bar that's just changed this line here, and you know how things are going. It sends here percentage, that's here, the time it's taking, and the memory, okay? So basically what this DI compile does, it gets the list of all those operations and run one by one. But if you check here, we have the operations. It comes from this get operation configuration. And this one, I guess, is the one responsible for the sequence. It has also a list of all the path to ignore. So basically, it's using to not run the operation, so not create inside the generator metadata. Oh, I didn't use this until the end, so I don't have the metadata here. Let's run this until the end. It's deleted. We need to run again until the end. Let's wait. Since I'm recording the screen, I'm using a really slow local server, so less. So like you see here, it took 80 minutes. The normal one, if your computer is not bad, it's going to be 2 minutes, 1 minute, 3 minutes maybe, but never 8 minutes. 8 minutes a lot. So anyway, and like you said, like you saw, I'm here inside the setup DI compile class, and one of the first thing it does is it's going to delete all the metadata folder to recreate it from zero. So since when I started here, I console the command, I lost the folder, and the folder didn't create. So now I had to wait until the end to recreate the folder. Okay, and how it recreate the folder? It's going XML one by one and create the array here, like we said. And they have these 9 operations. If you're using Magento 2.3 or one of these old ones, it's going to be 8 steps, 8 operations. I think 2.4, it's already 9. And okay. And here inside this guy, DI compile command that's inside setup folder, we have the sequence of all the operations. Where is that? It's here, right? Yeah. Here we have no, not here, actually it's here. We have here the get operation configuration. So here we have all the 9 steps. We check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And the sequence that's going to run is here. So the first one you see, that's repository code generation. So it's this one. Oh, actually, this is the 0. This is the 1. Repository generation. So if you check this guy, repository generated, it's the first one. A few of them, you're going to see that they have things like exclude patterns. So these guys here, they are going as arguments to this one, this operation. And most of them, it's because we don't want to create inside metadata information about tests. So sometimes you're going to see, and you already know about that, but you have the test folder. And here we have unit test in this example, and the Magento framework testing here. And I'm just saying here by these parameters here that I want to ignore any test. So it's not going to go inside this folder when creating the generated metadata here. Okay. So here's the sequence. I'm going to put, first let's open here where we had all this operation, the list of files. So it was setup, let's remember, setup source Magento, setup module, DI, app, right? Oops, app. Task operation. Here we have the task manager. It's the one that we saw that's going to get operation one by one. And here we have all the files. So for example, proxy generator, it's a proxy generator here. And if you check here, all these guys, they're going to have a class called do operations. So if I open, for example, this one, it's going to have two operations. It's like the execute. It's what's going to be running for each of these guys. And so let's take a look of the list of all the operations that setupdi compile run. Here we have the list of all the operations that setupdi compile runs when your Magento versions has 9 operations. You can check that operations folder. There's one file for each one. They're not hard to understand what they do. So the first one is the proxy code generation. This first step, the setupdi compile, is to check all the proxies. So it's going to check all the DI XML files and detect any proxy that you use there. So if there is the class name / proxy, it's going to create these proxies like we already saw. It's going to create inside generation. The class name is going to be a folder. Inside it's going to create a proxy file, and it's going to generate the PHP code there. The second one, it's a repository code generation. This we already had a video about database. So repositories, it's about database connections. So the second step is going to check all the repository interface you have in your code, and it's going to be sure that you have a factor for it, including the search interface for it. So it's just to create a factor for all the repositories. The repositories are related to the database, right? So, okay. The third one is the service data attribute generator. It's for extend attributes. So you know that you could have, we are always talking in this video about di.xml, but there is also other XMLs. And one of them is this extension attribute. And inside the extension attribute, you can be using a class that doesn't exist, for example, factory or a proxy or something like that inside this file that's not di.xml. So this third step is going to check all the service, all these extension attributes, if there is anything to be created there from that class. The fourth one is the slower. I think it's the slowest one normally when you run setupdi compile. It's basically going to check everything from all the di XMLs and create all the necessary codes. So it's going to create factories and all those things. And the fifth one is going to create the interceptors. So the interceptors, you already know, they are the plugins. So if you have a class, it's going to create inside generation folder. The class is going to be a folder. Inside it's going to create interceptor.php, and it's going to create all the interceptors inside that. The sixth one is the area configuration aggregations. So you know that inside Magento you have many areas. Like we said, we have admin HTML for the backend, we have front end, we have GraphQL, all those areas that you can have DI XML inside it. So what is going to do? Inside the generation, there's a folder called metadata that we already saw. And you're going to see that each area is going to have a PHP there. So it's going to be admin HTML.php, frontend.php, graphql.php. So all these areas are going to have their PHP file. And what we have inside it, it's actually the information of DI XML in an array format. So it's going to be in PHP there. You can see there, it has the arguments, it has the preference, all that inside a really big array. So the PHP is just a return. In the top of PHP, you're going to see a return, and it's returning a giant array. So all these areas files, they are big files, and it's hard to load them. And this area configuration file, they're used in many places inside Magento. So Magento is not going to load the XML to check information. It's going to get directly from this folder because it already gets the array all organized and sort by the right way. The seventh one is the interception cache generation. We have a video about cache, but for example, if you are using Redis in your environment PHP, so you have that file inside app etc, you have an env.php there, and there you have configurations. For example, all the configurations to the database and all those things. And there you're gonna see in that array you're gonna see something called cache. And inside the cache, you're going to see default, And there, if you have Redis or you have any other kind of cache there, that's the one that's going to be used in this step, this operation 7. It's going to actually save the interception information inside that. And in my case here, I'm using Redis, so it's going to save interception information inside Redis. So it's much easier and fast to load than load the giant array that's there. The operation 8, it's app action list generation. So here we have controllers, right? You already know how controllers work inside Magento. Controllers are related to routes. So every time you open a page in Magento, you are using the root system of Magento, and that page, that route, it's associated to a controller. So every time you read action inside Magento, it's the same thing of controller. So controller are actions. And this step number 8, this operation 8, is going to create a file listing all the controllers that you have. So this file is going to be inside generation metadata. It's app_action something, I don't know, I think app_action_list, I guess it's the file name. And there you're going to see a PHP code that returns an array. And this array, it has the key lowercase of the path for this controller, and the value is its controller path itself. So every time you open a page, the root, it's going to load this file and use this file like a cache. So root, you know, if you're open something that's related to a controller, so it's used basically for root, for the routes too, when you open URL. The operation 9, the step 9, it's plugin list generation. So also inside generation metadata, you're going to see there's a file that lists all the plugins. So you have there as key of this array, so it's a return array, the key of array is the class name, and the value is true or false. Every time it's true, it means that that class, that's the key, and the class that is class name inside the key. If it's true, it means that class has a plugin, it has an interceptor. So it's like easy way to find if you need to use you need to check the plugins. The framework knows that you need to check plugins for that class or not, and not check all the di.xml and search for type. There's a plugin tag inside it and do all the process. Okay, so here we have the list of all the 9 steps and what they do. You can check all those files. Each one has inside that operation folder that we showed before, and you can check one by one. It's really nice to understand better how framework works.